My name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about the lunar eclipse in Taurus taking place on November 8th. I have to confess something. This is not a lunar eclipse that I am really looking forward to. Eclipses can be pretty dramatic in and of themselves, but whenever you have an eclipse involving one of the modern planets, a modern planet is any planet that was discovered after the year 1781. Before 1781, we had the 7 traditional or classical planets. That's the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But in 1781, the planet Uranus was discovered. And Uranus, as we all know, is the planet of revolution and change. Why is it the planet of revolution and change? Because Uranus in 1781 was discovered at the exact midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. Anyone who's taken history class knows that those were pretty wild and rollicking times when it came to overthrowing governments and trying out new forms of social order. This is the period of time when Uranus is discovered. So Uranus essentially, because it was also discovered at that midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution, also what Uranus did quite abruptly was overthrow the classical order of the 7 traditional or original planets. All of a sudden, it wasn't them anymore, and the club was open to any new one who showed up. And so Uranus becomes known as a modern planet, simply meaning that it's a planet that was discovered in the modern age. And on the tail of Uranus was Neptune's discovery in 1848 and Pluto's discovery in the year 1930. Now, these are very slow-moving planets. Uranus takes about 7 years to go through one zodiac sign. That's in comparison to the fact that the moon will take 1 month to go through all 12 signs. The sun will take 12 months to go through all 12 signs. So subsequently, the moon will spend 2 days in a sign, and the sun will spend 1 month in a sign. Uranus will spend about 7 years in a sign. That's how far out there Uranus's orbit is around the sun. Neptune is roughly about 13-ish years in a sign. And then Pluto, because of its elliptical orbit, can be anywhere from 12 years in a zodiac sign to 32 years in a zodiac sign. So that's something to keep in mind for those of you who have been dealing with Pluto and Capricorn. Okay, yes, the past 12 years have been pretty rough, but could you imagine 32? Anyway, when I was learning astrology, I was taught that these were the modern planets. Another way that they were referred to were the transpersonal planets or even the generational planets. Now, they were the generational planets because they took so long to go through a sign. And essentially, when you dealt with particularly Pluto, it sort of like stamped its energy on an entire generation. The Pluto and Leo generation, for instance, is famously known as the baby boomer generation. And so that's an example of that. So I was taught, you can't really take these planets personally because they take so long to travel through a zodiac sign. And so the information they're going to give you in a chart is going to deal more with the culture or the generation that the person is living in rather than the person itself, which always led me to believe, well, which planets are to be taken personally? Are we supposed to take the sun, whether it's a cloudy day or a really summery day, personally? Or is the moon being taken personally? Or are we on a first name basis with Mars? Are we like, hey, what's up to Saturn? I mean, this whole idea of personal versus transpersonal. Let's just say it's not something that really sat well with me. Now, it has with other astrologers, and other astrologers have written extraordinary things about these. But for me, that whole idea of personal, transpersonal really hasn't sat too comfortably with my understanding of the planets. However, there is something absolutely to be said about the slow motion of the planets and the power of the planets. I mean, Uranus is an extraordinarily powerful planet. Neptune is a very powerful planet. And Pluto is the one that I absolutely respect. It is probably the most powerful planet in an astrological chart. And that's because these planets are associated with realms. And perhaps that might lend itself to the transpersonal. The realm that Uranus is associated to is space. When Saturn in Greek mythology separates the mortal world from eternity, Uranus becomes associated with eternity or space. It's the stars that don't move like the planets do when they were observed by the ancients. So it was this idea that beyond the seventh heaven lay eternity. So it was the starry night, it was space. And so that was the realm of Uranus. The realm of Neptune was the realm of the ocean, a completely different realm from the one that we live on in this world. I mean, we can all go to the beach and we can maybe snorkel or something like that, but none of us really goes down into the ocean and lives there full time. Certainly not unaided by something which gives us oxygen, but we can't really exist down in the ocean, just like we can't exist out in space. If we were rocketed into space and landed on the moon and opened the door and like, I'm going to celebrate a new day, I mean, we'd be dead in an instant. So these planets are associated with realms that are different from the world that we live in. Uranus is space, it's actually eternity. Neptune is the ocean. And then Pluto, of course, is the underworld. That's everything that's under the surface of the world. I mean, we can go splunking and we can explore caves and things like that, but we don't, burrow underneath the earth and live there next to the molten center of our world. It's just too forbidding and hostile to our existence. So these planets have an extraordinary power, or what they represent are powerful forces, mainly in the area of realms. And so also the action or the forces that they can bring into life are also rather large. Now, you might be noticing that I'm kind of making the point for transpersonal, which is something I always ultimately end up doing once I start talking. So anyway, there is this idea that Uranus, when it comes into your life, upsets the order of your life. Mars upsets the order of your life to some degree, and Saturn can do that, but not to the volatile degree that Uranus can do it. When Neptune enters into your life, or enters into your sign by transit, Neptune sort of like releases this influential energy. It begins to mythologize things in your life. Neptune next to a planet mythologizes it. It glamorizes it. And so Neptune can have a very hypnotic effect when it comes into a particular sign or affects a particular house in your chart. And of course, Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. So let's get back to Uranus. Let's get back to my, I can't wait for the lunar eclipse in this week to be done attitude, okay? And that's because we have a lunar eclipse taking place in the zodiac signs of Scorpio and Taurus. And lunar eclipses are very different from solar eclipses for two reasons. First of all, a solar eclipse in traditional astrology was always used to predict or to decipher or to interpret the fates of those in power. Now, that's sort of done nowadays, but actually not really done much nowadays, except a lot of mundane or political astrologers, will employ will employ the solar eclipse in that purpose. But solar eclipses often had to do with the overthrow of people in power or troubles that would beset people in power. So solar eclipses always made kings nervous, or emperors, or popes. Nowadays it's CEOs, celebrities, and politicians. But anyway, when we're dealing with the lunar eclipse, the sun sort of talked about people who were glorified or celebrated in society. When you're talking about the lunar eclipse, you're talking about, well, the moon is always associated to the body, but you're also talking about the body politic. You're talking about the body politic with a lunar eclipse. So lunar eclipses were what astrologers would look to in order to predict what was happening in the lands that were ruled. Okay, so was there going to be pestilence? Was there going to be famine? Were there going to be dangerous fires? You know, these sorts of things that affected the populace, that affected society, that affected the land, the body politic. This was given to the, this was associated to the lunar eclipse in astrology. So here we have a lunar eclipse, which takes place on a full moon, but because the Earth is going to pass between the sun and the moon, which need to be at polar opposites to create the full moon, its shadow will be thrown on the moon, and so the light of the moon will disappear from the nighttime sky. And so this was seen as from astrologers as releasing something upon the land, something that was going to affect the populace or going to affect the people. Now, anyone who's been watching any kind of news or reading Twitter feed knows that there's a lot of upset and restlessness that's going on with the people these days in various and sundry countries, where people are up in arms and revolting or trying to overthrow their government, or people are being herded literally like cattle, you know, into adopting or following certain governmental mandates or dictates. Okay, so if you kind of stay with that sort of cattle, that Taurus energy, you have those people who are, you know, charging at the government, you know, they're really angry, and you have those people who are sort of like being corralled or herded and who aren't liking it. Okay. Why are they not liking it, or why are they suddenly charging at the government? Because Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, has been in the zodiac sign of Taurus since the year 2018. And so Uranus has been really causing a lot of volatility, and well, a lot of volatility, a lot of outbreak, a lot of breaking out in the lives of all four fixed signs. So that's going to affect Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, but it's particularly happening in the zodiac sign of Taurus. We aren't big fans, us astrologers aren't big fans of things like that happening in the zodiac sign of Taurus, because Taurus is by nature peace-loving. It is a bull, it's associated to cattle, and cattle graze, and they don't really go and create a lot of trouble unless they've been upset. And so when you have a planet like Uranus moving through a zodiac sign like Taurus, it is literally upsetting the apple cart. And let's face it, nobody likes their apple carts being upset. Now we can put a nice, you know, sort of like ribbon on top of it and say this is what needs to be done to raise social consciousness and awareness and things like that. But as you probably notice, you know, when that starts happening, you also raise the volume of protest, anti-protest, people in power, people not in power, and all of this comes to pass. This is why people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and Mother Teresa, you know, really advocated peaceful change, you know, that if you're going to resist or if you're going to go up against the way that something is done, you do it through nonviolence, because once things start getting violent, they only increase. And so that's why that has always been associated with that, even though it's been made fun of and, you know, what did that ever get us and things like that. If you look at the way that lasting change has taken place, it's really through those means. So you know, a nonviolent thing can be just as resistant and perhaps even more effective than a violent overthrow or a violent rebellion. Now, when we are dealing with this lunar eclipse, which is taking place at 16 degrees Taurus, it is almost exactly conjunct Uranus. And of course, in the United States, this is taking place on Election Day. Okay, we already know going into this how volatile the election temperament has been. Things have gotten violent, and they have not been rebuked. You know, people in power have not come forward and really said, stop doing this. There's kind of a quietness, or let's see where this goes. And then, of course, you have news anchors who are buzzing around these sorts of volatile incidents, like children on a playground yelling, "Fight, fight, come see this fight." They circle around the fight and sort of agitate it and things like this. So all of these things are being agitated in this Uranian energy. Is this a very difficult prediction or interpretation to do? No, not at all. Basically, it's a lunar eclipse taking place in the area of the populus. There's going to be radical and surprise upsets. And whenever you have radical and surprise upsets, they're going to be challenged. People are going to refuse to recognize it. It's going to carry on. Nobody's going to be happy with the result, and everyone's going to argue and carry on following November 8th. And this is going to go on for a while. We have Mercury, which is conjunct the sun on that very day, and then it opposes Uranus. Whenever I've seen these with elections, oh, there was that famous retrograde of the Florida election that took place. And then there was also a Mercury retrograde that played a very pivotal role, if I believe, in the 2016 election. So, or maybe it was the 2020. Honestly, they all become a bit of a blur. But anyway, Mercury's involved again. And whenever Mercury is involved, things are going to be mucked up. And so that's mucked up. And so this is something that we're all going to have to go through. Now, what I want to remind everyone is that it's very easy to shoot bullets into the air and get the cattle stampeding, but it's much more difficult to herd it. It's much more difficult to herd the cattle. And so there's a lot of exploitation that's taking place with this Uranian energy. Get people upset, keep them upset. I think most of us are tired of being upset, and keep them aroused and, up in arms and, fighting and arguing and all these sorts of difficult things. Is there a master plan to this? Is there a great conspiracy that's taking place? Is there an agenda, that's being done by people who are well-to-do, who are like, I doubt it. I doubt it, because it's human nature to just sort of rile up, see where it goes. I mean, I actually pretty much doubt it. I don't really feel like human nature works that way. I think there are people who see opportunities and like to exploit them and make the most out of it. But I think, and then there are different people who come to power who want to sort of like shape society, and that might work for a while, but at some point that's going to get overthrown or rendered redundant. And all you have to do is look at the history of the world to see how much of this repeats. So, since none of us is in a position where we can be sardonic, or we can be jaded, or we can say, this too shall pass, how do we get through these types of eclipses with our mental and spiritual and emotional and economic health intact? Okay, it's kind of like, how do we get through this? The first sort of thing is to realize that there are people who are pushing buttons and pulling levers, who are trying to get reactions out of you, all right? And that's something in which, again, we can sort of learn a lesson from Taurus. Taurus is a zodiac sign that's often overlooked, but has tremendous lessons that can be taught through that sign. First of all, Taurus is a pastoral sign. It's a peace-loving sign. It's ruled by Venus. It doesn't like war, and it doesn't like conflict. It will, charge if it's been angered, just like the bull does. But for the most part, it's named after an animal that really doesn't want to cause anyone trouble, and it's not predatory, and it's not in its nature, looking to be malevolent. So when you have a Uranus in the sign, this is an energy that has been constantly upset, an energy that has been constantly volatilized, an energy that just really wants to go back to things being normal, but then someone starts waving those red flags or coming out with capes or sounding really loud music or something like that in the din, and it gets everyone going again. So one of the things that you can sort of sink into with Taurus energy is a thick skin. Okay. A lot of times, and also a stubbornness. A lot of times. I mean, Taurus of all the fixed signs is always the one that's accused of being stubborn. It is no more stubborn than an Aquarius is. Okay. So, but Taurus is always being accused of being stubborn. But there's something really wonderful about that, especially in times like this where people are trying to like excite and provoke. Okay. You can sort of like sit your big old Taurus butt down in the middle of the road. I really don't know how else to put it, but I'm just going to sit my big old Taurus butt on down here in the middle of the road and not move. And that, I think, is a delightful response to a lot of this hyper, hypertension or hyper, things being made hyper and excitable. You can just sort of sit yourself down in the middle of the road and the car horns can honk and people can yell and you can just sort of sit there and look at them and not move. And what are they going to do about it? Honestly. Okay. So people might say, well, they could, but honestly, more often than not. Okay. You can just sort of like sit this one out. You can sit there in the middle of the road. You can let it go in one ear and out the other, or you can have a thick skin and just let it all bounce off. Nothing saying you have to respond. Nothing saying you have to stampede. Nothing saying that you have to like join in, the playground. There's a fight, there's a fight, there's a fight. There's nothing saying that you have to do that. Now, when you have a modern planet like Uranus taking place, as an astrologer, I've learned to have healthy respect for Pluto. I mentioned that before, but also a very healthy respect for Neptune and for Uranus. What I have found kind of works best with that energy is you let it play out. What are you going to do? I mean, if there's a big hurricane coming, are you going to stand there by your house and say, not my house? If there's a big fire that's approaching, are you like with the garden hose armed and ready? You evacuate. Okay. You get out of there and you hope and you pray that you're spared. Okay. And then you come back afterwards and maybe you have been, maybe you haven't. And then you pick up from your life from there. Is this easy to do? No, it's awful to do. We watch this happening all the time as nature rebels against the way that we go about our lives on this planet. I mean, nature has often had disasters, and that's not really been a rebellion, but some of the things that are taking place in a form of rebellion. And so these are forces that are larger than life. These are forces that are larger than you. And you come back to the situation and you see what there is to salvage, if anything. And you pray that there is something to salvage. But sometimes when you're dealing with Uranus, or when you're dealing with Neptune, or you're dealing with Pluto, you have to step out of the way. You have to evacuate. You have to get out of the way of that planetary energy, because it's going to come bursting on through no matter what you do. Okay. The modern planets pack that kind of power to them. And then you circle back and you see what you can salvage, or you see what you can't salvage, and you move on into a different direction in your life. These are things that all of us deal with in our lives, and these are things that are reflected in the planets in the sky. Again, the planets don't bring about these influences, but they give us a heads up of what's coming on down the pipe. So this is something that you do. You don't have to play into the Uranian energy. You let the Uranian energy play out. Okay, you can stand in your Taurusness, and not let it roll you, not let it, affect or get you, into that stampeding mode. You can resist the stampede, and you can see how all of this plays out afterwards. Okay, the other lovely thing that Taurus teaches us, and in a world where we're all connected with the internet and things like that, we can sometimes get a bigger idea of our own personal influence than we have. Okay. And so what Taurus can teach us is, we can get caught up in these, conspiracies or theories or fright calls or distress calls, or, only you can help save this and only you can help prevent that. We can get caught up in that, and we can feel, like it's taken over our lives. Or we can practice the simple Taurian creed of, you know, of making my small corner of the world right. Okay. Now, this, I'm not advocating here the ostrich policy of burying your head in the sand and leaving your big ostrich behind up there for everyone to like take a shoot at, or lions to jump on, or something like that. I'm not advocating an ostrich policy, but what I'm saying is that not all of us are in positions to wield that kind of influence on a global or an enormous level. And there are some times where we do join a movement, a nonviolent movement of protest, where we can affect that kind of change. But not all of us are in positions where, you know, we can, you know, order out armies, or dismiss or delete this, or take over a Twitter company or something along those lines. But we are in charge of our small corner of the world. And with our own small corner of the world, we can join with other small corners of the world, and we can affect a change. But it can come out of our lives, that it can be organic to our life. You know, the call to change or whatever doesn't have to come and kidnap our life, or abduct our life, or throw it, you know, into an enormous bonfire of, you know, cause and outrage. You know, this is the beauty of the earth signs. It's like you start with your corner of the world and you make that better, and that teaches you a respect and an understanding and a celebration of other corners of the world. I don't know about you, but, you know, how much do we sort of like love a Rick Steves, or one of those National Geographic shows where we see the way other cultures and other peoples live, or we see animals or nature live, and that, doesn't that bring to you a celebration of life? Doesn't that bring to you a celebration of the diversity and the eclecticism of life? So we do have these outlets that teach us this, and we might not be able to affect a change in a faraway place or a country, but we can affect it where we are, and we can affect the people that are around us, and we can bring good, peaceful things to those areas. Some people might say this is naive and idealistic, but I would answer, I think it's actually very practical and very Taurian. And finally, the thing that I want to end with, you know, once we're on the other side of this lunar eclipse on the 8th, and then the Sun-Uranus opposition on the 9th, and then the Sun-Saturn square on the 11th. Again, we've been through 2021, which has been nothing but Saturn-Uranus squares, and so it's overthrow or surprise upset, or this person's in power and now they're no longer in power, and now we're going to rebel against this people, and, you know, that's going to be squashed, and that's going to beget more rebellion and more. It's all of this, you know, and these changes don't have a sticking point. They're not sticky changes. Okay, they're reactions to being in a car with Mr. Toad at the wheel of it, you know, as it careens from this to this. What we need, what we want, of course, with Taurus is peace and stability, you know, peace and stability. And maybe we can't affect it on the global level, but maybe we can bring it into our own lives. And remember, the nature of Taurus, the nature of cattle, is Venusian, you know, so for those times when you're feeling like, wow, this is really out of whack, or, oh, this is so crazy, or, oh, this is so fatiguing, this is so exhausting, this, where's this going? When will this end? You know, I'm sure we've all felt that. One of my followers on YouTube sent me a wonderful link back at the, I think it was the solar eclipse in Taurus. And it was a link called something like Cows Love Classical Music. And I love that link. All you have to do is type in cows love classical music, or cows and violin and piano, or cows and accordions, or cows and harmonicas, you know, and what you see is that these people, what you see is these lovely people out in the fields who are playing these instruments, and the cows come from wherever they've been, and you hear their little cowbells going, and they come and they stand around this person playing, and they listen. That's something that we can send out into the world. You know, I don't know, pick up your harmonica or your accordion or your cello. But for those of us who aren't very good with harmonicas and accordions and cellos, we can send out that peaceful music, that peaceful vibe, for lack of a better word, those peaceful actions, that peaceful life. We can set that out into the world. And believe it or not, we can change the direction that the world is going in just by doing that.
Hey there, astrology lover. Did you know that you can learn practical astrological magic here at Astrology Hub? That's right. We're bringing you a hands-on workshop where you'll learn everything you need to know to get started with Jen Zart, PhD, who's been practicing astrological magic for over 2 decades. I recently asked Jen what students can expect in the upcoming workshop, and here's what she had to say.
Magic is a practice of engaging with, I would call it, the forces of the universe in a devotional way to achieve results. I find that engaging with magic just makes your life better on all levels, because it really forces you to think about, what do you really want? What is worth doing ritual with? And who are you? Who do you want to become? You know, even the desire to change your circumstances points towards a gap that might need to be addressed in a magical and a mundane way.
I just love that. Jen is such an amazing, dynamic, and inspiring teacher, and I'm so grateful that we get to share her wisdom with you in this workshop. So if you're interested in learning a hands-on approach to making magic every day, go to astrologyhub.com/magic and enroll in practical astrological magic today. Class starts on November 15th, so don't miss out. Go to astrologyhub.com/magic. We can't wait to see you in class.
Thanks for tuning in to the Astrology Hub Podcast Network. If you love the show, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, review, and share it. And if you don't know how to do that, here's how you can leave a review in Apple Podcasts on iPhone. Make sure you're on the landing page for the Astrology Hub podcast and not an individual episode. Scroll down to the bottom until you reach Ratings and Reviews. Click one of the 5 stars under Tap to Rate to leave a rating, and under the most recent review, tap the Write a Review button. And if you're on another device, just find out how to leave a review on whatever podcast player you use. Then, share what you love about the show or how it helps you navigate your life. We'd love to hear your stories, and by doing this, you make it possible to make shows like Horoscope Highlights happen every week. Thank you again for tuning in, for being a part of our community, and for making astrology a part of your life.